Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is having a very lovely Monday, aka Valentine's Day. I just thought I would come on here and first introduce myself. My name is Kathryn Booth. I am a 19-year-old OCD and mental health advocate from San Francisco, California. I have struggled tremendously with OCD and other related disorders from starting from a very young age, but I was only diagnosed with OCD at the age of 12 and just continued, my OCD continued to grow worse and worse until I was in high school. And that's when it started to interfere with my life in ways that I never knew was possible. And that's when I made the decision alongside my therapist and my family and just myself being the one who really realized that I couldn't function with my OCD being at this level. I made the decision to go to residential treatment. And fast forward, that was 2017. I think, yeah, it was 2017. And now it's 2022. I am currently a sophomore in college where I'm studying clinical counseling psychology and minoring in women and gender studies. And I now am at a point where I'm doing really well in my recovery and with my OCD. And I'm able to go on here, like, sharing my story and answering your questions with No CD, an incredible resource for people with OCD and just anyone who is currently struggling and needs to access help or build community, because community can be one of the best things for people who are struggling with OCD because it's really isolating OCD. And I just want you all to know, especially on Valentine's Day, where we're, thinking a lot about the idea of significant others and being in a partnership and just the idea of uncertainty surrounding it, that you're not alone, especially in your struggles with OCD and in day to day life. And that even though it may not feel like it, things will get better because, at least from my experience, and I know that of so many others, it will. Okay, so enough of me blabbering. I am going to look at these questions and I'll get started answering some of them. And I'm going to try and choose some questions that I feel like will apply to more people just so the responses can be generalized. But let's see. Oh, perfect. This one. Matt asked, in the spirit of Valentine's Day, can you touch on ROCD? I've been struggling with these obsessions for years. I so desperately want to hold my wife without the anxiety mine produces. Okay, this is a very timely question, especially considering that today is Valentine's Day. So thank you for asking that. For all those who don't know, OCD can present in many different forms, although it's all classified under one diagnosis. And one of those forms is ROCD, which stands for relationship OCD. And the whole idea with OCD, which we as sufferers know, is that it'll latch on to anything in our life that we value or care about. And for many people, those are the relationships they have. And these can be purely platonic relationships, so those you have with friends, or they can be relationships that you have with your family members. And it most commonly, or at least from what I've seen, is it presents with people and their significant others. And that's especially prevalent considering that it's Valentine's Day. Um, and these obsessions, like all facets of OCD, just fill you with the most uncertainty surrounding the things that you're essentially most certain about in retrospect. So someone may be like what it sounds like in a marriage, and the marriage may have been, may have been on for many, many years and is a healthy, solid marriage. But OCD just likes to butt its little head in there and be like, oh, here's something that somebody loves and cares about. I am going to start kind of picking on it and just, butting its little head in there and just trying to find any way for you to question things that you know to be true. And one important thing with all OCD obsessions is that they're ego dystonic. And if you don't know what ego dystonic means, it means that it goes against an individual's morals and values. So even though an individual may be having these thoughts or obsessions, they actually contradict what the individual actually wants. So they are not reflective of a person, who they are, what they value in life, or what they actually want. They're just thoughts and they don't really mean anything. But OCD tries to convince us that they are the most meaningful, most pressing things in our lives, which can be super scary and I think just really overwhelming and daunting. And so for people with relationship OCD, they often struggle with their relationships, obsessions surrounding their relationships with their loved ones. And this can look like questions about their relationship or their views of their own partner and their stance in the relationship. So some of those things may be like, oh, do I actually love my significant other? Am I, is this a healthy relationship? This may even start questioning your own commitment to the relationship. Am I committed to this relationship? Is my partner committed to this relationship? Sometimes people will even get intrusive thoughts, filling them with doubt on, is my significant other cheating on me? Am I cheating on my significant other? Just all these really, really distressing thoughts. And they can be really, really scary. But like any other facet of OCD, the best way to treat our OCD is through ERP, exposure and response prevention. And for all those who are either new to the OCD community or just newly receiving a diagnosis or think they may struggle with OCD, ERP, exposure and response prevention, is the gold standard treatment for OCD. And basically, it involves facing your fears head on by using a hierarchy. And you would just place your fears and whatever you're struggling with in like a systematic order, where you start with the things that are least anxiety provoking or triggering for your OCD, and eventually work your way up to the things that are most anxiety provoking for your OCD. So for some people, let's say for people with ROCD, if someone is obsessing about whether their partner knows that they love them, a compulsion of theirs might be repeating, I love you, I love you, I love you, over and over and over again to their partner, just so their partner knows that they love them, and unsure of whether or not their partner actually knows. So while the obsession is the fear of their partner not knowing that they love them, the compulsion to kind of that someone will choose to eliminate, to try to eliminate their anxiety, which is only does so temporarily and actually makes OCD come on stronger, are the compulsions. So that for that person, it would be telling their partner that they love them a ton of times. And that can really interfere with functioning in on so many levels and can present in many different ways. And I think that for this person, it might be not to tell their partner for a certain amount of time that they don't love them, and just slowly building on that and just sitting with the uncertainty, leaning into this discomfort that OCD is causing. Because the best way to deal with these feelings of uncertainty and the distress that OCD causes us is just to sit with it, regardless of how hard that may sound, it actually works. It works so well. And as someone who's gone through so much OCD treatment and has sat with a lot of uncertainty, I can say that it 100% works. Okay, let's see. But that is a really great question. And I bet that's something that a lot of other people are struggling with today as well. Okay. Um, okay. Here's a good one. How do you know when you are in recovery? So, as someone who is in recovery, I'd say it's a really long process, and recovery can look different for an individual at different times and at different moments and with different things that they're struggling with. So I kind of view recovery as being the point where you are actively fighting your OCD, where you're doing your exposures, where you're sitting with the discomfort. And one of the biggest things, even though I still do planned exposures, I did an exposure today with my therapist this morning. I most a majority of the exposures that I do face are natural exposures. So, ones that I encounter when I'm out and about in my daily life that I face as a college student who is going to classes, who's doing work, and who's also having friendships and relationships and just all the stress and anxiety associated with that, especially the anxiety that's triggered by OCD. And so for me, getting to the point of being in recovery is dealing with all those um, real life exposures head on and not avoiding the things that gave me anxiety, but facing them and choosing to actively live my life in accordance with my values and the things that I want to accomplish, and not letting OCD dictate or determine the way my day is going to go, or even something as big as the way that my life is going to go. And for so long, I was living in fear. I was extremely debilitated by my OCD. And I think I was living life where OCD was in the driver's seat and I was a passenger and with absolutely no control. So we could even say that I was in the very, very back of the car and and felt like I had absolutely no control over OCD. But now I'm at a point where I have that control. Obviously, even though I have been in recovery for quite some time and have gone through residential treatment, partial hospitalization, intensive outpatient, inpatient, and outpatient therapy, and I still go to therapy multiple times a week. But I'm at a point where I feel that it no longer, it's so weird to even think about this, but it no longer dictates my day. And I think that's for me the biggest indicator that I'm in recovery, and just kind of comparing where I am now to where I was and just how much progress I've made up until that point. But even when I wasn't doing as well as I am right now, I still considered myself to be in recovery. I just think that I'm farther along in my recovery and then I wasn't as far along. Okay, let's see. Um, okay, this is actually a really prevalent question to a lot of what I'm currently dealing with. Um, so OCD is often, and I'm speaking from my own experiences, what my therapist and I talk about a lot, what I've read and researched, but just wanted to put a disclaimer out there that I am not a medical professional. I am not a clinician or a therapist. I am a psychology student. I'm a person who lives with OCD, but I can only speak to it from my own experiences and not that of a medical professional, just to put that out there. But ADHD and OCD are very commonly occurring. Many people with OCD have a comorbid condition, another condition that they struggle with. OCD is often seen alongside anxiety, depression, eating disorders, even, and a lot of times seen with ADHD. And my therapist, this is kind of the way that she framed it to me, but ADHD is kind of a cousin, a close cousin to OCD. They're oftentimes found co occurring in individuals. And for the longest time, I did not think I had ADHD. I was like, and most of my mental health and my medical professionals didn't ever see it either. And it wasn't until like the past year that my therapist mentioned ADHD might be something that you're struggling with. And what I found for me personally is that my potential ADHD like symptoms masked were masked by the severity of my OCD and my hypervigilance associated with my OCD, and all that I was experiencing with OCD really masked all the symptoms that I potentially have associated with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And so currently, after a lot of time, and quite frankly, it was a really frustrating process to get to this point and just trying to convince medical professionals to believe you, especially when you present so high functioning and you're not like jumping off the walls in the way that people, instantly associate ADHD with. I am receiving the first part of my ADHD evaluation a week from today, so next Monday. And I'm really hoping that we're able to answer some questions. But to answer your question, yes, many people do have ADHD alongside OCD, and OCD alongside many other conditions too. Let's see. Um, hmm. Let's see. Okay. What type of OCD do you have? So, the main type of OCD that I struggle with is perfectionism OCD. That I think is probably my biggest facet of OCD that I struggle with, specifically in relation to my schoolwork. And basically, my OCD will associate my performance in school with my value as an individual. And a lot of just my self worth and people's perceptions off of me being based solely off of my academic achievements. And this was something that heightened significantly once I entered high school because I was showing a lot of symptoms of OCD um, starting at a really young age, but these symptoms just continued to increase in severity. And when I entered high school, when the academic expectations were so much higher, and just hearing constantly, oh, these are the grades that are going to predict to what college you go to, that just really scared my OCD. And so many of my compulsions, I felt that I had to do things perfectly. I had to, whenever I read something, I had to understand it perfectly. And those obsessions led me to reread as one of my main compulsions. So whenever I'd read something, I'd have to read it 4 or 5 times. I would just get so stuck. I would just reread the same sentence over and over again, questioning whether or not I really understood it. And it got to the point where I just hated reading. And also, another thing for me when reading was I had to read all the punctuation. I had to read like commas, periods. And if I didn't read every single word in the book, including like publication details, page numbers, I did not read the book. And therefore, I felt like I wasn't actually doing the assignment. And that just made me hate reading. I was just like, I don't want to do this at all if this is what reading is going to entail. And I think that's what led me to just hate it for a long time, is my OCD took away all the joy and pleasure that I had when it came to reading. And that was one thing. And another thing that OCD really latched onto was my writing. I'm someone who does really well in English and history and the humanities top subjects, and OCD latched onto that. So for me, writing has always been a really big strength of mine. And OCD convinced me that every single word that I put in an essay needed to be perfect. And this caused me to spend countless hours writing essays. Like 5 paragraph essays were taking me 50 hours to write when my OCD was at its worst. And it got to the point where I could barely even write it. And my OCD debilitated me to the point where I kind of was essentially like paralyzed, in the point that like I couldn't write anything because I was just so stuck in my head, and all the obsessions and the compulsions just overtook me to the point where I couldn't actually do what I needed to do, which OCD can greatly interfere with daily functioning and just your ability to do the things that you need to do. And in that case, as a high school student, I was having a really hard time, and I was not sleeping. I was barely functioning. And that's when my treatment team and my parents made the decision, okay, she needs residential treatment, just because going to therapy once a week was not helping me to the extent that I needed the help at that point. But I have made significant progress in regards to my perfectionism OCD. In 2020, I graduated high school with honors, something I didn't even think I graduate high school, not due to my inability to perform academically, but just how much my OCD kept me away from school and just being in treatment, and just how much OCD interfered with my ability to actually like do my schoolwork, and just because I was just so hyper fixated on the idea of perfection. But yeah, in 2020, I graduated high school. And then later in 2020, in August of 2020, I started college away from home, which is a point I never thought I would get to. And now I'm a sophomore in high school. And I am doing so well. Like, not to brag or anything, but this is a really big accomplishment for me to get to the point where I'm actually able to do all my reading for classes. I'm able to write, and it essentially being effortless is just going from not being able to even write my own name to being able to easily write pages and read like 40 pages a night. That is tremendous progress, and it's really possible. So I know I went on a while on a tangent, but I just wanted to emphasize that recovery from OCD is really, truly possible. And that's, I think, one of the main things that I want to emphasize, because I know when in the height and like severity of your OCD, it can feel as though nothing's going to get better. But through ERP, through hard work, and through much determination, you can get to the point where you are able to function and live your daily life despite the debilitating nature of OCD. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to find some good. Um, um, let's see. Okay. Biggest tip for harm OCD: when it has convinced you that you are this terrible and horrible person, it might snap and do these violent acts. So, the biggest thing that I want to reiterate is that OCD will convince you that you're a terrible person, OCD will question your value as a person and your morals and your standards because it does that. It gets in our head. It screws with us to the point where we no longer really know ourselves or understand what we believe in, or even understand or even recognize that we're good people because having these thoughts, we start questioning, why am I having these thoughts? Am I a terrible person? And we just latch onto the thoughts because that's what our brains do with, people who have OCD. And OCD, like I mentioned before, the thoughts and obsessions are ego dystonic, which means they do not align with what the person wants. So if an individual is having thoughts about, is experiencing harm OCD, is having thoughts about hurting themselves or hurting another person, they don't actually they don't have any intent or any true desire to do any of those things. They're just thoughts. But people with OCD will latch onto those thoughts. And kind of the way that I framed it for myself is that people with OCD have sticky thoughts, whereas for people who just have, because everybody has intrusive thoughts, regardless of whether or not they have OCD, just people with OCD, those thoughts tend to stick in their mind. And we tend to question what that means about us as an individual. Do we actually want to act on those thoughts? Are we a terrible person? Are we a danger to society? Whereas other people, they'll have the same exact thoughts and they'll be like, oh, that was a weird thought, and just kind of move on with their life. But for us, the thoughts are just much stickier. And I would say the biggest tip is just to, regardless of how hard it may sound, do the ERP surrounding it. I know there are so many great ways to tackle harm OCD through exposure and response prevention, but I know many of those ways are really dependent on the individual and their specific obsessions and compulsions. But I think the biggest thing is recognizing that you're not your thoughts, and that just sitting with the discomfort and the uncertainty associated with those thoughts is actually what's going to help you in the end, even though that may seem counterproductive and like you're accepting the thoughts. Sitting with the thoughts doesn't equal accepting the thoughts. It just means that you're sitting with them and just being, okay, that was a weird thought. Maybe it does mean I'm a terrible person that wants to hurt something. Maybe it doesn't mean that I'm a terrible person. But in the end, you have the control. OCD does not, which it took me such a long time to understand that. I think for so long, I thought that OCD had all the control. But realizing and recognizing how much control I really had was a game changer. I think it is what made me realize that recovery is possible when I learned that I had the control in the situation and could choose whether or not to engage with my OCD. Nonetheless, that did take a very long time, but it's a point that people can get to with any facet of OCD, whether it be harm OCD, whether it be relationship OCD, just right OCD, contamination OCD, moral scrupulosity, pedophilia OCD, suicidal OCD, every single facet of OCD. Let's see. Okay. Here's a good question. Can SSRIs help with our OCD? I just started one and I'm hoping it helps somewhat because my mind has been spinning nonstop with our OCD thoughts the past few weeks and I feel physically sick all the time. Okay, so I'm speaking from an individual with OCD, but from my own experiences, medications can be super, super helpful with OCD, any facet of OCD. And that's something to talk to your psychiatrist about. Um, I think that it also does take a while for a medication to begin working. But from my own personal experience, it works really well to pair a medication with ERP. And I kind of view a medication as a tool for me to better access the ERP and better be able to engage in exposures and engage in the treatment. Just because sometimes OCD can keep us so stuck in a place, but medication can help us get out of that place and get to the point where we want to get to in our treatment. But I would also say that in regards to medications, it can be a really arduous process in the sense that a lot of times it's about trial and error and just finding the right medication for you, which, even though it is science and even though it is medicine, it's not an exact science. It just, every single person responds to medications differently. But I think if you have a psychiatrist who has an understanding of OCD, that can make a really big difference because they'll likely have a better understanding of what medications work for OCD. And SSRIs, I know, do work for OCD. But I think there is more information on specific medications that work for OCD on the International OCD Foundation's website. They have super helpful resources on there. Come to like finding a therapist, finding a psychiatrist, which medications work, some great books and resources, and also NOCD is incredible resource. So I think just utilizing your resources and trying to advocate for yourself and your needs is one of the most important things in OCD treatment and recovery. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Can someone have PTSD and OCD at the same time? So, as I went on before about ADHD and depression and anxiety alongside OCD, the same can also be true for PTSD. OCD, I think, I'm not exactly sure the percentage, but I think it's pretty high. That, like, I want to say, don't take me on this, but I think it's around like 90% or some extremely high number of individuals who have an OCD diagnosis also have a comorbid condition. And that can include anxiety, it can include depression, it can include an eating disorder, ADHD, it can include PTSD, it can include autism, it can include borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, you name it. It can include any disorder, and PTSD is just one of them. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Okay. In your opinion, what types of work/careers could a person with just right OCD excel at? Also, are there any positive benefits of just right OCD? Thank you. Okay, I think one of the biggest things is that I've recognized is that my just right OCD, um, also known as perfectionism OCD, actually made me perform worse in school when I was heavily reliant on it and when my OCD was at its worst. I actually didn't do as well academically as I am now, where my OCD is not interfering with my life to the extent that it did, and I have a majority of the control. So I think that the doors are open to any possible career path or any possible work for anyone with OCD. It just is about allowing yourself to engage in ERP and the treatment and fully embracing the OCD recovery lifestyle. Because once you choose recovery and move closer to your values, the closer you will become to having, endless possibilities of what you can do with your life. And what I think I was so focused on for so long is I thought that my OCD was helping me do better in school. I thought that it was helping me succeed, when in actuality, it was doing the opposite. And it was slowly just picking away at every sense of self and identity that I had, and just my values, and my just who I felt I was as an individual. It just started to take away all those things from me. So I think that for me, a really big part of my treatment was coming to the realization that OCD isn't helping me in any way, regardless of the subtype and whether it may seem more beneficial in nature. It doesn't help you in any way. And I think that was a really big realization for me to come to, that it was going to hinder me in ways and not help me. But I think it is, I know there are certain career types that people with OCD um, or skills that people with OCD tend to have. I know people with OCD tend to be more creative, and people with OCD tend to excel a lot more in what they do. And I'm not necessarily sure the science behind it, but I know, I'm trying to think of the account on Instagram. I love the Instagram OCD community. I could go on and on about how much I love and have benefited from the community of individuals on Instagram. I'll actually post the link to my Instagram account because I run an advocacy account on Instagram, The Road to Recovery from OCD. And I've learned so much about OCD from clinicians, from fellow advocates, and sufferers from OCD. So I'll post my account name. There, I posted the link in the comments. But one of the accounts, I think it was Mind on Fire OCD, had a really great post a little while ago on all the positive qualities someone with OCD has. I think maybe also the Instagram account OCD Excellence had some posts on positive qualities of people with OCD. But I think one thing that I have learned is that people with OCD are so much more empathetic and compassionate to the struggles of others, because they understand what it's like to be fighting an invisible battle with your brain, and just how exhausting it can be, and what a toll it can take on daily life and functioning. And I think just through everything that I've gone through, I've become so much more empathetic to the struggles of other people. Even if we don't struggle with the same thing, I've gained so many more connections with people and have empathized and shown compassion towards them, because I know what it's like to struggle so much and people not know and not understand what I may be experiencing. So I think that was a really big thing with my OCD. It's just my capacity for empathy grew so much more. Okay. Okay, let's see. I know that, let me see. Looking, it looks like um Kathryn had a comment earlier that I skipped over. So let me go back and try to find that comment. Let's see. Okay. I feel compelled to interrogate my boyfriend about other women in his life. The pain and feelings of betrayal are real. but I know it is irrational and is causing major problems. So, OCD, it sounds like you're experiencing relationship OCD, ROCD, which I talked about at the beginning of this live webinar in relation to Valentine's Day. But our OCD can make us question not only our commitment to our partner, but also our partner's commitment to us. And for some people, that can show in the form of questioning infidelity and questioning someone's commitment to you. And OCD wants us to struggle with that and wants us to question our partner and wants to interrogate our boyfriend or girlfriend or significant other about other people in their life, just because we want that certainty so much, because OCD, it is beyond horrible and anxiety provoking, which all of us know. But I think that that's a really great way of putting it. Um, I like to phrase it, the fear is real, but the threat is not. And I think that heavily relates to this. And especially in the context of relationships, I think one of the biggest things can be giving your partner or your family or even your friends tools so they can better learn and understand your OCD and understand how to help you, how not to engage with it, and understand what you may be experiencing, and understanding that these questions are a part of your OCD and a part of what you're experiencing. And one of the best ways to do that is if you are currently seeing an OCD specialist, an OCD therapist, can even be having a therapy session with your significant other and allowing your therapist, as a professional and as someone whose career surrounds OCD, explain to your significant other what you're experiencing, how to best support you, what is not supporting you and your recovery. And those are some really great resources. I know that NoCD has great resources. I also know that the IOCDF, the International OCD Foundation, which I mentioned, has incredible resources as well. I know there are some really great books, which I know they have listed on the IOCDF website. A lot of them are for family members of people with OCD, but I would just try to educate your partner and just also know for yourself that these are just thoughts. These are just obsessions. They're not grounded in reality. They're completely irrational, and I know how painful that can be and how much distress it can cause and how many problems it can cause in a relationship. But I think just tying it back to your values and also allowing and giving your partner, in your case your boyfriend, um, the opportunity to learn and better understand your condition. Okay, let's see. Um, let's see. I'm trying to. I'll probably answer one more question. See, Christine had a question from earlier, so let me try and go up and find that. Let's see. Oh, perfect. Christine, I struggle with health anxiety and I have a doctor's appointment this week. I'm worried about what the doctor is going to tell me. How can I deal with the anticipation and what ifs? Okay, that's a great question. And I know a really, really big trigger for health OCD, health anxiety in particular, can be going to the doctor and just all the uncertainty associated with that. And like I said before, even though it's so hard, don't get me wrong. It's painful to do it, but it does get easier with time. It's just leaning into that uncertainty, sitting with it, and understanding that those feelings aren't going to last forever, and that slowly they are going to get easier to sit with and easier to tolerate. So my suggestion before your doctor's appointment this week would just be to sit with the possibility of maybe they're going to tell you something that you don't want to hear. Maybe you're really unhealthy. Maybe you're really healthy. You don't know. And I think that's what OCD wants us to see, think that there's going to be some really big problem, and that by us engaging in a compulsion, that the anxiety associated with that problem is going to go away. But the only way for that anxiety to eventually decrease is by sitting with it and not giving in to what the OCD wants. And oftentimes that is the obsession, engaging in the compulsions associated with the obsessions. So, my biggest suggestion would just be to sit with the uncertainty and the discomfort and just sit with all the possibilities and the unknowns associated with it. And I assure you that over the week, the more that you sit with it up until your appointment, the easier it'll become. Because that's the nature of OCD and exposure and response prevention. Okay, let's see. Gonna answer one last question. I know I said that about the last one, but I'm just trying to answer as many questions as possible. Okay. When a sexual orientation OCD thought pops up, what is the best way to tackle it? Is it better to not engage with the thought or to actively think about the thought? Intensity of the thought. So with OCD, with any type of facet of OCD, whether it be sexual orientation OCD, harm OCD, um, relationship OCD, just right OCD, contamination OCD, moral scrupulosity, OCD, you all want to handle it in the exact same way. So that is sitting with the uncertainty, acknowledging the thought, acknowledging that it's there, acknowledging its presence, and also acknowledging the uncertainty associated with that thought. So sitting with all the what ifs and letting those what ifs be, and leaning into the uncertainty and saying, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'm gay, if I'm bi, if I'm a lesbian. I don't know any of those things. And that's just all about leaning into it. And that's the best way to approach any type of OCD, through exposure and response prevention. Okay. So I think that I am going to wrap up for tonight, but I just wanted to thank all of you for coming on here and joining me for tonight's webinar. I had such a great time answering your questions. I'm sorry if I did not get to them all. There were so many great questions, but I just want all of you to know that there is hope and that there is the ability to get better and live your life to the fullest, regardless of OCD and all the ways that it interferes with our life. So just know that it will get better and that ERP is the way to go. I hope you all have a happy Valentine's Day, and I'm sending lots of love and strength your way. Bye.